The Xpro3 in this video is a pre-production sample, and all images you see in the video are JPEGs out of camera, as unfortunately raw images are not yet compatible with software.
I search this guy famous.
How long has it been since I kissed you? I don't wanna wait. How long has it been since you held me? I don't wanna wait. How long has it been since I felt like this about anything? I don't wanna wait. I don't wanna wait no more. How long do we have to put up with this lonely charade? As long as I know that I'm winning, I played this game, but I want you close, baby, right now. I know you feel the same. I don't wanna wait. I don't wanna wait no more.
The Xpro3 is often referred to as the rangefinder style Fuji camera. It's also often compared to Leica's rangefinder, although I don't see any similarity between the two cameras. In fact, if you look back through Fuji's older rangefinder film cameras, in particular the GW series, which is a medium format 6x9, even the TX, I see a lot of the design concept in this camera coming from Fujifilm's own history in rangefinder cameras. The Leica body is very different. In fact, well-known cameras, if you had to sort of compare in the 35mm film sort of rangefinder type cameras, I would say the Contax G series is probably closer to this in look than some of the other cameras that it's often compared to. The Xpro3 is not a rangefinder camera. It does not have a rangefinder in the camera. The reason why it's called the rangefinder camera, I presume, is because of the viewfinder positioning, the fact that you're optically looking through the body, but that's got nothing to do with being a rangefinder. I personally find the rangefinder era of cameras fascinating. I don't know a lot of its history. I did learn it when I studied film production and film work. We actually had that as part of our studies. We obviously learned about the usual parallax error and all the things that rangefinder cameras suffered from. But what I always find interesting is that the early rangefinder cameras, their focusing system relied on a rangefinder that was not actually built into the camera. It sat often on the top of the camera. So what you would be doing is you'd be looking through a split screen, and the one image, half of the image would remain the same. And when you calibrate the rangefinder, effectively working out distance, the two images in the split screen would finally sort of fuse or coincide, and you knew that you had worked out the distance. Then the rangefinder told you the distance that you had worked out. Then you had to go to the lens and enter by turning your lens to that distance and then take the photograph. Obviously, with new additions of rangefinders, they were able to implement the rangefinder into the camera body and ultimately into the viewfinder. So when looking through the viewfinder, you saw the split screen by focusing, which is effectively calibrating the rangefinder. The split screen fused, coincided, and you got focus instead of having to re-enter that value onto the lens. So definitely an interesting history. It's fascinating. And the one thing I will say, even though this is not a rangefinder, theoretically, it suffers from similar issues that rangefinder cameras had. I do realize that most of you know about rangefinders. You also know about the hybrid system. But for those of you who don't know, a common problem with rangefinders is that they suffer from something called parallax error. Effectively, what parallax error is that unlike an SLR where you're looking with the mirror system, looking through the lens at your subject, so what you see is what you take, you are looking through the body, not the lens. And not only that, you're looking sort of parallel to the lens. So if you can imagine a line running from the viewfinder and a line running from the lens, almost like a railway line. Now, if you're photographing something that's far away, it's not an issue at all. Pretty much what you see in the viewfinder is what you get when you take the photograph, because the distance between the viewfinder and the lens is irrelevant when something's very far away. But when you get close to things, that error between this line and this line becomes apparent. So much so, I remember as a kid when we had those really cheap rangefinder film little things that we would carry around. You would try to take a photograph through a fence or something and get the picture back, and here's this pole straight in the middle of your photograph. And you say, but I didn't see that. That's because your lens was lining up with the pole, but your eye was looking through the gap. And that's the parallax error because you got really close to something. So through the years, cameras have worked out means and ways of sort of giving you a frame line and adjusting that frame line. And I think in the beginning when the X-Pro1 came out, this was really revolutionary. They were providing us with a camera that wasn't a rangefinder camera. It had the appeal of rangefinder. You were looking through the body, giving you an optical view, because at this stage they had transitioned over to mirrorless. And they took care of the parallax error by digitally overlaying onto the optical viewfinder what the sensor was seeing, effectively showing the frame line. And as you move closer to the subject, that frame line moved. And I will say in the X-Pro1, when it first came out, it was effective to a degree, but it had a lot of bugs and a lot of issues. It wasn't very accurate. Often you'd miss focus when you got too close to something. There were a lot of issues, and I really, when I got that X-Pro1, most of the time I spent willing this camera on because I wanted it to be a perfect camera, because it was such a beautiful camera. It was such a joyful camera to use. I was willing it on, but it never quite fulfilled my needs, especially when I wanted to transition into professional shooting. And so the first camera I bought was the X-Pro1. I'd always ran parallel next to my work cameras professionally. It became my personal camera because I still enjoyed it. But only really when the X-T1 came out did now I see the benefit of mirrorless, in the sense now the focus system had improved, more accurate. I could live with the viewfinder, electronic viewfinder, because they'd improved on it. They had added features like being able to turn off the preview and not in manual mode. So I was using flash. I could do all those different things that an optical viewfinder could offer me, but an electronic viewfinder couldn't. And slowly but surely, this amazing camera, the X-Pro1, kind of drifted off. I sold that one. I didn't see myself ever looking to get another one, even though I always saw that as my favorite Fujifilm camera, the X-Pro. Then the X-T2 came out. At the same time, the Xpro3. The Xpro2 came first, then the X-T2. I was part of the launch of the X-T2. I was part of the whole development program where I landed up sort of, sending photos back to Fujifilm and so on and so forth. So I transitioned naturally into the X-T2 and never really took on the Xpro2, even though I did shoot it and I have used it multiple times. That was such a massive jump. So any jump we've known from sort of XT series cameras onto the next have been relatively small. The biggest jump I've seen on any camera was from X-Pro1 to X-Pro2. That was massive. And there's a lot of similarities that you find in the two flagship bodies. So in this new release of the Xpro3, a lot of the innards, a lot of the functions, a lot of the menu, the image quality, a lot of it is really the same as the X-T3. But really, I still think that the focus on this camera is its hybrid viewfinder. That's what it's known for. It's not a rangefinder. It's not just a mirrorless camera. They've got this incredible viewfinder that's unlike anything else. There is no other camera on the market. This is arguably the most modern, unique camera. I even sometimes wonder how they got this to actually pass when they initially came up with the idea, because it's really a hit and miss idea. I can understand people shooting it for a while, enjoying the fact that they have this optical with this digital overlay, being able to see where they focus auto, because you're adding autofocus to this sort of overlay as well. And it has a sort of gimmicky appeal to it. And in my mind, I was thinking, once they flip over to electronic viewfinder, slowly but surely that's going to overtake and they're not going to be using the optical anymore. But I was wrong. There's this huge cult following of this camera. It sits there in the Fuji family. A group of people that will not change and only shoot X-Pro, and they shoot it optically all the time. I know people. They love it. They're obsessed by it. It somehow gives them a sense of real photography, making something, creating something, and it really brings out the best in them. So I have a lot of respect for this camera. It still remains my favorite Fujifilm X series camera, although I never transitioned into using it in work because I couldn't. I couldn't afford to keep both. I could only buy one series. So I've got two X-T3s. I enjoy the big viewfinder. That's very important to me. And in the release of the Xpro3, they've given us an improved hybrid viewfinder. Now, this is an interesting discussion because there has been compromise made on this, as well as additional features. The hybrid viewfinder as electronic viewfinder in the hybrid viewfinder has increased in size, and that was one of the things that most of the X Pro shooters asked for: increase the electronic viewfinder, which they have done. It's not the same size as the X-T3. It's also more responsive. It works better with the autofocus system. The autofocus system is what you find in the X-T3. It performs the same way from what the tests I've done. It's incredible. It's a big step up. Nice and responsive, nice and clear, nice and big. But there was a sacrifice that was made. With the hybrid viewfinder, the second issue that rangefinders had and the hybrid viewfinder had was certain focal lengths are not practical to use with rangefinder cameras or hybrid finder cameras. Once your focal length got too long, first of all, the lens would have been blocking a lot of the rangefinder view in the first place. Obviously, on this camera, you can switch over to electronic, but on rangefinders, a long lens would have blocked most of your view out of your viewfinder. So that was an issue, firstly. But not only that, when the camera works out your frame lines, you've got this ridiculously small little frame within the optical vision, which is showing you what your longer focal length is actually framing. So much so that it's hard to even make out. And most of the time, you couldn't use longer focal lengths, but obviously what made the hybrid very cool is that at that stage you could flip over to electronic and you get the actual framing, and it's as though you're shooting it on any of the other X series cameras. That was great. So there is limitations to this viewfinder. It sits between certain focal lengths. But the sacrifice I was talking about is that on the X-Pro3, by holding the lever down to the left for like 3 seconds, you could magnify the optical viewfinder. So it wasn't a massive magnification, but it certainly helped a lot. Meaning, if you had a longer focal length on and you wanted to increase that frame, it came up as a small little block in your optical view, you wanted to increase that, you could hold it down for 3 seconds and it magnified it and it made that block bigger. Now that's been sacrificed. I think the two options were a 0.36 magnification and a 0.66 magnification. Those are the two optical magnifications, and you can flip between them by holding down the lever for 3 seconds. That's gone. They've overall given you a better magnification for the vast majority of focal lengths, so they've kind of found like a happy medium. But now, the unfortunate thing by finding a happy medium is you've lost your wide angle on optical. So those, as far as I know, I think it's around, I actually need to double check, but I found that sort of around the less than about 20 mil, I think it was about 20 millimeters or less, I found that I started to lose the outer frame line. It went beyond. So like when I was using my 14 mil 2.8, I couldn't see. I had to flip to digital, to electronic viewfinder to make sure I could actually frame what I was looking at. My 10-24, no way. So some will argue, is that a benefit? Is it not? I would say the optical viewfinder people who just use it all the time are going to maybe have an issue with that, because if you're not using the electronic viewfinder as much, that was an important feature. On the other hand, I think those of you who shot both optical and electronic, or mainly electronic, were battling with the really small size of the electronic viewfinder, which they've increased. So you can understand the dilemma. And from what I know, I don't know all the details on it, this is an incredibly high-tech viewfinder. It's very expensive to make, and it's not a simple process. Not only that, in the hybrid viewfinder can you change between sort of the optical to the electronic, you also have the option of flipping in the small little rangefinder style window on the right that shows you your focus point or a digital copy of that. So it does multiple things. It's an incredible piece of technology that's in here. So it would be easier of me just to say, oh, that's bad, don't do that, why do they do that? It's a lot, I think it's way over my head, put it that way. So from what I can see, a sacrifice was made. I think for some people that sacrifice is not going to be welcomed. For some people it's going to be welcomed. It's very interesting. The bone of contention, funny enough, about this camera in sort of most forums and most chats is not the hybrid viewfinder. It's the LCD at the back. I appreciate that Fujifilm continued on with the X Pro, except I would have maybe preferred it to go even more extreme in a different direction. Now, I know a lot of these corporate companies. They have shareholders and so on and so forth. People can come up with design ideas, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to get passed. Profit is the incentive, and we need profit to be the incentive, because if companies don't make money and do well, then there's nothing in R&D to produce even better products for us. So it's important that these companies do well. So here was Fujifilm's opportunity. They were delayed on releasing the X-Pro in the usual sequence. This was the time that Fujifilm was going to carve a new direction, send the X-Pro down a totally different direction. So when I actually thought of the design elements that I wanted in the camera, which I had expressed to Fujifilm and a few other people, even though most of the time I express these things, most people have a glaze on their face because it's hell of a boring. Not everyone agrees with me, but I wanted it to be more extreme than this. I wanted them to take the the LCD away totally. I wanted a large viewfinder as big as you see on the X-T3, still keeping it with the hybrid. And now that I've learned how complicated this hybrid is, that's not exactly the easiest thing to do, but that's what I wanted. I wanted the menu system stripped down to one page, maybe 8 to 10 things, just the basics. I wanted all the buttons on the camera to have no names on them, so we have maybe 7 to 8 function buttons. This is what I wanted. I wanted a camera that was featureless, that was bare bones stuff, that you could just focus on photography and making images. I have the X-T3, so it's easy for me because I've got multiple cameras. So if I'm in an environment where I want to use an LCD and shoot over my head, I've got the X-T3. With this camera, I always wanted to be as natural as possible. I wanted to use the optical viewfinder. I just wanted to walk around. I don't want to have an LCD. If I need to check the electronic, I can. I can turn any one of these buttons into the playback button, whatever's closest to my hand. I can quickly play back an image in my viewfinder. I can see the exposure. For me, there was no point in having an LCD. Now, for some, it's big. Some want this camera to be everything for them. And this is the tough thing. But what I will give credit to Fujifilm for is that they've created cameras that cover multiple types of shooting. I think they've got a good balance. It's not an easy thing. I can imagine trying to please people, particularly in this market for the X-Pro. This is an incredibly hard crowd to please.
I'm not going to discuss all the new features on the Xpro3. A lot of that you can get online. A welcome addition to the Xpro3 is the new film simulation called Classic Neg. I use Classic Neg in the images that I shot for this video. Obviously they're JPEG out of camera, and the black and whites I just took into Lightroom and converted. But from what I can see, an initial impression is that it's very nice. The rear sub monitor or rear status panel on the back is a memory LCD. It's deliberately a very dim LCD so that it doesn't project light in dark situations, because it's obviously permanently on the whole time. You can display your film simulations or camera settings, and the camera settings are all customizable. The camera comes with the now quite common 2-card slot, which is found across the sort of the higher end X series cameras, as well as a Type-C USB port and a microphone jack. Also to mention that the EVF in the hybrid viewfinder is now an OLED display as opposed to an LCD display found in the earlier models. This model comes with a top plate and bottom plate made of titanium, and also in 3 different color variations: black, Jura Black and Jura Silver. I use the Jura Silver in this video. Duratech is the product they use to actually coat the titanium to make it scratch resistant. What adds to the beautiful look of this camera is the job that Fujifilm has done with the top dials, command dial and exposure compensation, real tactile, beautiful finish that I think complements the titanium. They've also worked to change the viewfinder, where the old viewfinder had a rubber finish, which I think was just a dust collector. They now have a molded one-piece sort of plastic unit, which I think will sort that issue out. I also noticed that the exposure compensation dial has been recessed a bit, so I think the chance of knocking it now has been reduced, and I think that's a clever move, because I think that was an issue on the Xpro3. The hidden LCD on the back of the camera, when open, can fold up to 180 degrees. Now, the one issue that may arise is that the tripod mount on the bottom of the camera is really close to the LCD screen, so when mounted on a tripod, you're not going to be able to fold it 180 degrees. However, I have been told that Fujifilm has released a hand grip which moves that tripod mount closer to the lens and allows that screen to fold a full 180 degrees.
So there's a front moving into Cape Town. There's a cold front coming in, probably our last rains before our hot, dry summers. And so I quickly bombed down to the harbour just to get some shots of this so I could test it out, because I've only just received it. And I saw a group of young guys sitting around chatting, and I saw one guy and I said, I'd like to photograph him. So I went up and said, listen, I'd love to photograph you. Would you like some photographs? And he said, sure, no problem. And he was more than open and willing, and we had a chat. And I did maybe 15 minutes with him, 20 minutes with him.
Thanks so much, Jamal. I really do appreciate that you were open to the idea of me photographing you. And you were a great sport, great to chat to you. It was a pleasure meeting you, and it was nice to know that you actually live pretty close to me. So it'd be good to hook up again sometime.
I really enjoyed shooting this camera today. I was worried that I was expecting too much from this camera because I had been anticipating it for so long. By improving its performance to that what we found on the X-T3, it has transformed this camera. It is a better camera. It's not only in its electronic viewfinder are we getting the same performance, we're getting better performance in the optical viewfinder. We're getting more accurate focusing. I found the frame line to be more accurate. I found the whole experience far more enjoyable, more precision-like, less sort of quirky, because I think quirky is the right word when it comes to sort of the earlier X Pro cameras. They were quirky. They had character, but there was a trade-off always somewhere. This is getting closer to perfecting the X Pro lineup, and it is an unusual camera and a difficult camera to try and perfect. I think there's a balance between trying to compete in the market where cameras are just throwing out feature after feature after feature, and people have been told in their minds, don't buy that camera unless it's got this, this, and this. And then the camera manufacturer's like, we better add this, this, and this. And sometimes those things aren't needed, especially if you're trying to forge your way in a new direction in photography. Be bold, be brave, and I think they have. At the same time, I believe they could have been a bit more bolder. So a lot of people are going to disagree with me on that. They wanted the LCD, they wanted all those things, and that's fine. We're all entitled to our opinion. It's not a big deal. But I think over the months and over the weeks, as this camera grows on people, I think this is going to be one of Fujifilm's best-selling cameras. I really do. I think I've got used to the viewfinder. I've got used to the fact that the LCD folds away very quickly. Wasn't a massive adjustment for me. I think they've done a good job. I really do. And I think a lot of people are going to enjoy this. And I would say to those people who use the Xpro3 who are really concerned about the fold-away LCD and the benefits, give it time. See if you can go down to a camera shop, play with it a bit, see how you feel. Aesthetically, this camera is one of the most beautiful cameras I've seen. It really looks great. The camera looks amazing. I mean, just walking around with it today, I was in an area where a lot of people, you can see it. People look, what is that? It's not that that's what I'm wanting them to do, but it's an attractive camera. And I think not only does it hark back to sort of an older film day, it has lines that are quite modern. It has features that are very modern. It's just a fantastic camera. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts, what you think about it. So please do comment in the comment section. If you like this video, please do like it. And if you haven't subscribed, please do subscribe. Hit the bell icon and you'll get notified of upcoming videos. Thanks so much for your time, and God bless.